The sky over the Wild West burned crimson that evening, the wind whipping up clouds of dust across the rickety wooden streets of Dry Creek. Everyone thought Clara Jennings was nothing more than a bitter widow, living alone in her gray, decaying house on the edge of town. But no one knew. Hidden beneath the rotten floorboards of that house lay a secret powerful enough to burn all of Dry Creek to ashes. An old ledger bound in dark leather, its pages filled with names of the most powerful men around. The banker, the sheriff, even the ruthless outlaw Silas Blackwood. Names alongside staggering numbers and debts of blood and money. Undeniable proof that Clara's husband had been murdered to bury the truth. And tonight, Clara would face the question she had avoided her entire life. Could a widowed woman without a gun or allies stand against a corrupt town and a cold-blooded killer who ruled half the frontier? If she stayed silent, she might live out her days in peace. But if she dared bring that ledger into the light, the entire town would tremble under fire and blood. And just as Clara hesitated, the sound of hoofbeats thundered through the night, drawing closer to her home. They said death often arrived in silence. But in Dry Creek it always came with dust, gunpowder, and Blackwood's riders. You think a lonely widow can't change anything? Just wait, because this ledger will turn Clara Jennings into someone Dry Creek will never forget. The night in Dry Creek carried a strange weight, the kind that pressed against the chest and made even the bravest men walk faster down its dirt streets. The saloon lights flickered with drunken laughter, but beyond their glow the world seemed too quiet, as if holding its breath. At the very edge of town, Clara Jennings sat at her wooden table, the single candlelight trembling as though it knew what waited in the shadows. Her hands, weathered by years of ranch work, hovered over the leather-bound ledger she had unearthed that afternoon. For years she'd avoided the loose board beneath her floor. For years she'd told herself it was nothing but wood creaking under time's burden. But when she finally pried it open, the secret that surfaced nearly stole her breath. The ledger wasn't just paper. It was a death sentence. Page after page revealed names. Men of power, men whose influence shaped the territory. Sheriff Dillard, Banker Hawthorne, and worst of all, Silas Blackwood, the outlaw whose grip on Dry Creek was as tight as a noose. Next to each name were numbers, bribes, payouts, and coded notations of murders disguised as accidents. And among the names was one that made Clara's blood run cold, her late husband's. John Jennings, listed under unpaid. Her husband hadn't died in a random ambush, as the sheriff once claimed. No. He had been silenced because he knew too much, because he had stumbled too close to the truth hidden in these pages. Clara's trembling finger traced the ink, and for the first time in years, tears welled in her eyes. She had mourned John as a victim of misfortune. Now she knew he had been murdered, and the men who did it still walked free, still laughed in Dry Creek's saloon as if they owned the world. Her thoughts were interrupted by a distant sound. Hoofbeats. Slow at first, like a heartbeat carried on the wind, then faster, louder, until they echoed against the wooden walls of her lonely home. Clara blew out the candle in panic, plunging the room into darkness. She moved to the window, careful to remain hidden. Down the road, silhouettes emerged through the swirling dust. 5 riders, their hats low, their horses restless in the cold wind. She recognized the man leading them instantly. Even in the dark, Silas Blackwood's presence was unmistakable. His tall frame wrapped in a black coat, his teeth flashing gold when he grinned. He hadn't come this way in years. Clara's chest tightened. Did he know? Had someone seen her with the ledger? The riders halted at her gate. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Blackwood dismounted, his boots striking the earth with slow, deliberate steps. The sound was as dreadful as a death clock ticking closer to its final chime. "Evening, Miss Jennings," he called, his voice smooth but soaked in menace. "Mighty cold night for a lady to be sittin' alone. Mind if I step inside?" Clara didn't answer. She clutched the ledger tight against her chest, her heart pounding loud enough she feared the outlaw could hear it. Blackwood chuckled. Now, don't be rude. Folks in town say you've been digging around in places best left buried. Be a shame if curiosity got you hurt, like it did your poor husband." Her blood froze. He knew. The door creaked as Blackwood pushed it open without waiting for permission. His men lingered outside, their shadows stretching across the yard, but he entered alone, confident and calm, like a wolf who had already cornered its prey. His sharp eyes scanned the room, finally resting on the faint outline of the ledger clutched in Clara's hands. "Well, ain't that something?" he said softly, his gold tooth glinting. "Been looking for that book near 20 years. And wouldn't you know it, the widow Jennings herself keeps it safe all this time. Guess fate's got a sense of humor." Clara forced her voice steady, though fear threatened to choke her. "If this ledger is what you say it is, then it proves you murdered John. It proves you've been bleeding this town dry for decades." Blackwood stepped closer until his shadow swallowed her. "Lady, you think anyone's gonna believe you over me? Sheriff's mine. Judge is mine. Hell, even the preacher owes me favors. That book ain't proof, it's just your death warrant." He reached out, fingers brushing the leather cover, but Clara jerked back. "You'll have to kill me first," she spat, surprising even herself with the fire in her voice. Blackwood's grin widened. "That can be arranged." At that moment, a gunshot shattered the tension. The window exploded in shards of glass, and Blackwood staggered back, cursing. His men outside roared in alarm. Clara ducked to the floor, clutching the ledger. When she looked up, a figure stood in the doorway, revolver smoking in his hand. It was Marshal Elias Kane, the one man in the territory who had never bent knee to Blackwood. His long coat whipped in the wind, his eyes blazing with the cold fire of a man who had been waiting for this moment a very long time. "Step away from the lady, Blackwood," the marshal said, his voice hard as iron. "You and I got unfinished business." For the first time, Clara saw something she never expected in Silas Blackwood's face: hesitation. The outlaw took a step back, his hand hovering over his revolver, but he didn't draw. Not yet. The air in the cabin crackled like lightning before a storm. Outside, Blackwood's men were shouting, their boots pounding the dirt as they prepared to storm the house. Inside, Clara pressed herself against the wall, clutching the ledger that had suddenly turned her quiet life into a battlefield. And in that heartbeat of silence, she realized something that would shape everything to come. The fight for justice wasn't just Kane's or John's or even the town's. It was hers now. And no matter the cost, she couldn't back down. The storm of violence was about to break over Dry Creek, and Clara Jennings stood at the very center of it. The wind whistled through the cracks of the cabin walls, carrying with it the stench of dust and gunpowder. Inside the wooden house, Clara Jennings clutched the ledger to her chest as if it were her own lifeline. Before her stood two men, opposites as stark as night and day. Silas Blackwood, with his half-smile that promised death, and Marshal Elias Kane, whose eyes burned with the weight of an unpaid blood debt. The air tightened like a drawn bowstring. The smallest movement might spark an explosion of lead and blood. "You should ride out, Kane." Blackwood's voice was low, serpentine, each word sliding like venom. "Tonight is no night for chasing foolish justice. This widow isn't worth dying for." Marshal Kane didn't move, his eyes cut through the smoke like a blade. "This isn't about Mrs. Jennings anymore, Blackwood. It's about John Jennings, about 6 men buried in the sand outside of town, and about everything you've stolen from Dry Creek." A cruel chuckle slipped from Blackwood's lips. Still clinging to that ghost, are you? But justice, Kane. Justice is just another name for whoever holds the power. And here in Dry Creek, I hold the power. Outside, horses screamed. Blackwood's riders had dismounted, their boots pounding the dirt, circling the house like wolves. Clara's hands trembled as she opened the ledger, eyes darting across the names and numbers inked within. She understood. If Blackwood reclaimed it, the truth would vanish forever. But if she gave it to Kane, her quiet, hidden life was gone. Forever. Then Blackwood snapped his hand upward. Glass shattered as gunfire erupted from outside. Kane lunged, dragging Clara to the floor as bullets tore through the walls, splinters flying. Kane fired back, his Colt booming. Two figures collapsed in the doorway. The room filled with smoke, screams, and the stench of cordite. "Run!" Kane barked, but Clara stayed, gripping the ledger tight. Her eyes locked on his, filled with both terror and resolve. "If I run, the truth dies with me. I won't let that happen again." Kane froze for an instant, struck by the fire in her words. This widow, this seemingly fragile woman, stood her ground in the heart of the storm. In her mind, Clara saw John's face the night he died. The way his eyes had held a truth he hadn't spoken, a truth buried in silence. Now that truth lived in her hands, and she couldn't let it vanish. Outside, Blackwood roared, "Burn it! If I can't have that ledger, burn them alive with it." Torches flared. Flames licked the dry timber walls. Smoke poured in, choking Clara's lungs. Kane gripped her arm. "We have to go. If we stay, we die." But Clara shook her head. "We need the proof. My word alone means nothing. But with this ledger, Blackwood and his allies will hang." The firelight carved deep lines into Kane's weathered face. He gave a grim nod. "Then we fight to live long enough to use it." He kicked the back door open and hauled Clara into the night. Bullets whined past them, flames roaring behind. Blackwood's voice carried over the chaos. "Don't let them escape. Bring me that ledger." Kane returned fire as they sprinted toward the stables. Clara clutched the ledger tight to her chest, her heart pounding like war drums. In her ears rang John's words from long ago. "There are truths worth dying to leave behind." They mounted in one fluid motion, Kane pulling her up onto the horse. Hooves thundered as they burst through the smoke, gunfire cracking behind them. Blackwood bellowed with fury, his face twisted by firelight. "Jennings! That ledger will bury you just as it buried your husband." Clara glanced back once. Her house, her life's refuge, was consumed by flames. Everything she had built was gone, yet in her chest another fire burned brighter, the fire of justice. Kane reined the horse hard, breathing ragged. "You understand, Clara. There's no turning back now. Blackwood will hunt you to the ends of the earth." Clara's voice did not waver. "Then let him hunt. This time I won't run." The night swallowed them whole, two shadows fleeing into the darkness. Behind them, Dry Creek smoldered in fire and ash. Ahead of them lay a road stained with blood, vengeance, and a battle for the soul of the town. The prairie night stretched wide and merciless, its silence broken only by the pounding of hooves and the ragged breaths of two fugitives. Marshal Elias Kane rode hard, his jaw clenched tight against the cold wind, while Clara Jennings clung to the saddle behind him, the ledger pressed to her chest like a newborn child. Behind them, the glow of her burning cabin faded into the darkness, a chapter of her life consumed in fire. They didn't stop until the horses stumbled, foam flecking at their mouths. Kane pulled them up near a deserted mining shack that sat like a skeleton against the moonlit hills. The place smelled of rust, mildew, and old sorrow, but it offered shelter. Kane lit a lantern, its glow barely pushing back the shadows, while Clara spread the ledger across a warped table. Her hands shook as she turned the pages, but her eyes were sharp, searching for the truth her husband had died for. What she found stole the breath from her lungs. The book wasn't just a record of bribes and stolen silver. It was a map of corruption that stretched far beyond Dry Creek. Names filled the pages: Sheriff Dillard, Banker Hawthorne, Judge Caro. Next to each name were numbers, payouts, debts, blood money. And scrawled in the margins were darker notes: accident arranged, family relocated, and loose end cut. Clara froze when she saw John's name again. This time it wasn't alone. 6 other men were listed beside him, marked with the same cold final word: unpaid. Her voice cracked. It wasn't just John. They killed them all. Kane leaned closer, his weathered face lit by the flicker of the lantern. Ranch hands, miners, ordinary men who probably saw too much. Whatever they stumbled onto was worth burying them alive. Clara flipped the page with trembling fingers. Near the bottom of a sheet filled with coded numbers, her eyes caught a line written in a different hand, hurried and jagged. Dry Creek is only the beginning. Silver shipments move east. Kansas City. She whispered the words aloud, and the room seemed to shrink. It's bigger than this town. They're moving stolen federal silver across the entire territory. Kane's fist hit the table so hard the lantern flickered. Blackwood's just a pawn. Look at these names: judges, bankers, men with power. That's why no court here will touch him. The law itself is rotten to the core. Clara's throat tightened. Then what hope do we have? Who will believe us if everyone in power is bought and paid for? Kane's gray eyes met hers, steady as stone. Not the system, the people. Fear can bind a town, but truth can burn fear to ash. If we can get this ledger beyond Dry Creek, into the hands of someone untouchable, this whole rotten empire falls. Before Clara could reply, a sound outside froze them both. The crunch of boots on gravel. Then another. Then the metallic click of a rifle bolt being drawn back. Kane extinguished the lantern with a sharp breath. Darkness swallowed the shack. He motioned Clara behind a support beam, drawing his Colt with a silence that spoke of long years and too many battles. The door creaked open. A figure slipped inside, moving like a predator. For a heartbeat, nothing but silence. Then a voice, low and measured. Marshal Kane, you're a hard man to find. Kane stiffened. He knew that voice. From the doorway stepped a tall figure in a long black coat, the faint gleam of a badge glinting against his chest. Not the star of a lawman, but the insignia of the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Name's Hollister, the man said smoothly, his eyes cold as river stones. And you, Mrs. Jennings, are holding something that belongs to my employers. Clara's pulse hammered in her ears. She clutched the ledger tighter, though her fingers ached from the grip. Kane raised his gun, but Hollister didn't flinch. He simply smiled, calm and certain. You think Blackwood is your enemy? Hollister continued. Lady, he's just a hound sniffing at scraps. The real masters sit back east. And they don't like loose ends. The words struck harder than a bullet. Clara felt her knees weaken. Blackwood had been terror enough, but now she realized he was only a shadow of something far greater. The conspiracy wasn't a snake. It was a hydra, its head stretching far beyond the borders of Dry Creek. Kane's voice was steady, but his finger tightened on the trigger. If your masters wanted this ledger so badly, they should have kept better men watching it. We're not giving it back. Hollister tilted his head, the smirk never leaving his lips. Marshal, I've seen your kind before. Lone wolf chasing justice, bleeding himself dry for folks who'd sell him out for a nickel. You'll die for nothing. And her? He nodded toward Clara. She'll die screaming. Clara stepped forward before Kane could stop her. You tell your masters this: they may own judges, sheriffs, and bankers, but they don't own me. This ledger isn't going back to them. Not now, not ever. For the first time, Hollister's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowed, sharp as a blade. The silence thickened until the shack felt smaller than a coffin. Then Hollister slowly reached for his coat pocket. Kane raised his gun higher, ready to fire. But the detective only pulled out a folded letter, tossing it onto the table. "Read it," Hollister said. "When you do, you'll understand just how deep you've stepped. And when you realize there's no way out, maybe then you'll beg us to take that ledger back." He turned toward the door, his boots echoing against the rotted boards. At the threshold, he paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Enjoy your time in the dark, Marshal. When dawn comes, it won't be the fire you'll fear. It'll be the men who own the fire." Then he was gone. The door swung shut, leaving only the sound of the wind. Clara and Kane stood in silence, the letter lying between them like a snake coiled to strike. Dry Creek was no longer just a battleground against Silas Blackwood. It was the opening shot in a war neither of them fully understood, and Clara knew, with bone-deep certainty, that ghosts from the past had risen not just to haunt them, but to drag the entire territory into hell. The wind howled through the cracks of the rotting planks, carrying with it an icy chill and the dusty scent of silver from the abandoned mine. Clara stared at the letter on the table, her heart twisting as though a blade were pressing straight into it. Kane stood beside her, his hand still gripping the Colt, eyes fixed on the door that had just closed. In the darkness, both understood they had stepped into a game far greater than anything they had imagined. "He was telling the truth," Clara whispered hoarsely. "Blackwood is only a pawn. What's hunting us is an entire army of power." Kane nodded, tapping the letter lightly with his finger. "But maybe this is the key. If we want to know who the enemy really is, we have to open it." Clara bit her lip. The flickering lantern flame lit her face where lines of grief overlapped one another. Slowly she unfolded the letter, yellowed paper, bold, sharp handwriting. "To all representatives in Kansas City, Ledger number 7 must be retrieved immediately. It must not fall into the hands of the public. If necessary, eliminate all witnesses at any cost." Beneath the message was a blood-red signature. L. Harrington. Clara turned the page. A list of names, addresses, and silver payments sent out. All of them were officials, judges, people she had once believed were the law. Her hands trembled. My God, this network doesn't stop at Dry Creek. It stretches across the entire West. Kane clenched his jaw. Harrington, I've heard that name. One of the biggest tycoons in the East. If he's behind this, then Blackwood is nothing more than a guard dog. Clara folded the letter, tucking it into the ledger. We have to bring this truth to light. But just as she spoke, the pounding of hooves thundered outside, echoing in the night like war drums. Kane snatched the lantern down, signaling silence. Through the crack of the window, flames of torches and lanterns appeared, along with guttural shouts. Rats! You won't escape. Clara recognized the voice. Silas Blackwood. He had come leading at least 10 gunmen surrounding the mining shack. Horses neighed, rifles cocked with sharp metallic clicks in the night. Kane quietly pulled Clara back, whispering, They outnumber us 5 to 1. If we fight head-on, we're dead. Clara whispered back, Then what do we do? Kane pointed toward the black mouth of the mine behind the shack. There's a way out, but we need to buy time. Blackwood's voice rang out, each word dripping like venom. Clara Jennings, I know you're in there. I'll give you one last chance. Step out, hand me the ledger, and I'll let you die quick. But if you resist, he paused, then burst into a savage laugh. Then I'll let my boys have their fun before I tear you apart. Clara felt her blood turn to ice. But Kane gripped her shoulder firmly, his gray eyes blazing like tempered steel. Don't listen to him. We'll get out. Suddenly, a flaming bottle smashed through the window, exploding inside the shack. Fire burst up, licking at the wooden walls. Clara gasped, but Kane snatched the ledger, shoved it into his coat, and dragged her to the floor. "Run through the mine!" he shouted. They rushed toward the back door. But before they could reach the threshold, gunfire erupted. A bullet slammed into the beam above, dust sprinkling down onto Clara's hair. Blackwood's men had tightened the noose. Kane pulled Clara back, his face taut as a drawn bowstring. "We'll have to split up. I'll draw them to the front. You slip into the mine. Protect the ledger. It matters more than my life." Clara shook her head violently, tears welling. "No! If you die, I have no one left." Kane gave a fleeting smile, but his eyes were resolute. "You have something stronger than me, the truth. Don't let them steal it." The front door burst open. Blackwood stormed in, massive frame, tangled beard, predator's eyes. He gripped a double-barreled shotgun and roared, "Take the woman alive! As for Kane, kill him!" Gunfire thundered. Kane rolled to the ground, firing back, dropping 2 men. Clara sprinted toward the mine, heart pounding, the weight of the ledger in her hands. Flames roared behind, screams filled the air, smoke choked the room. She leapt into the black pit, hands groping through the darkness. Above her, Kane's voice rang out, his gun blazing. Then, a cry of agony. "Marshal Kane," Clara choked, but the darkness swallowed her call. In that instant, Clara knew. She was no longer the trembling widow. She was now the sole bearer of the truth and the target of an underground empire. Blackwood's footsteps thundered into the mine. His voice roared, echoing like a demon's snarl. "Clara, you'll never escape. That ledger will be buried with your corpse in this earth." Clara clutched the ledger tight, retreating deeper into the darkness. Her heart pounded wildly, but in her eyes a new fire blazed, the fire of someone who had lost everything and had nothing left to fear. The final confrontation had begun, in the heart of the shadows. The sound of heavy boots echoed through the pitch-black mine shaft, mingling with the smell of smoke and silver dust rising from the earth. Clara pressed her back against the cold rock wall, clutching the ledger to her chest. Every heartbeat felt like a war drum. Behind her, Blackwood's raspy laughter rolled closer, closer. "Don't run, Clara. I know you're here. That ledger won't save you. It'll bury you under this dirt and stone." The torch in his hand cast flickering shadows that danced along the cavern walls, shadows that stretched like the claws of a demon reaching for her. Clara took a deep breath. All the fear she had buried for years now burned inside her like fire. She remembered Kane's words, "Don't let them steal the truth. The truth is worth more than my life." Clara pulled out the small revolver Kane had forced into her hands before he charged into the fight. It felt heavy, awkward, yet it carried the last ounce of strength she had left. Blackwood came into view, scarred face twisted, eyes gleaming with greed. He smirked, walking slowly, confident like a wolf circling prey. "Hand it over, Clara. You're not a fighter. You're just a weak widow trying to stand against the world. And this world doesn't belong to the weak." Clara raised the gun, her voice trembling but firm. "You're wrong, Blackwood. This world made me what I am. And now I have nothing left to lose." For one breathless moment, 2 fates collided in the darkness. A man who lived on greed and violence, and a woman who carried truth and pain in her hands. Blackwood fired first. The bullet tore through the air, grazing Clara's shoulder, blood soaking her dress. But she didn't fall. She pulled the trigger. The gunshot roared, echoing down the shaft. Blackwood staggered, shock frozen on his face as he collapsed. The torch tumbled from his grip, rolling across the floor until it caught on old timber beams. Flames leapt upward, hungrily devouring the oxygen. Clara stumbled toward the tunnel's end where pale moonlight glimmered. As she collapsed at the mouth of the cave, a strong hand seized her arm and pulled her out. Kane, bloodied, battered but alive. "You kept it safe," he rasped. Clara nodded, holding up the ledger, its pages stained with blood. Kane smiled faintly, and together they turned back to watch the mine burning behind them. Inside that inferno, Blackwood's body and years of his secrets turned to ash. But the truth had survived, in Clara's hands. The next day, under a blazing sun, the townsfolk gathered in Dry Creek Square. Clara, her shoulder wrapped in bandages, stood on the steps of the courthouse. She raised the ledger high. Her voice carried not like that of a silent widow, but like a witness with fire in her chest. For years you lived in fear, believing you could never stand against Silas Blackwood and the men behind him. But this... She opened the ledger, showing page after page of names and numbers. Is the truth. The truth that we were cheated, bought, and broken, and that truth is no longer buried. The crowd stirred. Men clenched their fists. Women pulled their children close. Fear began to shift into fury. Kane stepped forward, his battered body swaying but his eyes burning bright. Justice isn't a stamp on a piece of paper. It isn't men in robes sitting on high chairs. Justice is us. It's when a town stands together and says, "Enough." A roar erupted, sweeping through Dry Creek like a storm. For the first time in years, the people looked at one another with faith instead of fear. Months later, Clara sat on the porch of her rebuilt home, watching children laugh and play in the sunlight. The ledger was no longer with her. It had been delivered to Kansas City, into the hands of an independent newspaper. Its pages had not only exposed Blackwood, but unmasked an entire web of corruption across the territory. News spread. Officials were arrested. Judges stripped of power. Yet for Clara, the greatest change wasn't in the law or the courts. It was in her heart. A woman who thought she had lost everything had found purpose again. Kane, once a loner, now had a whole town at his back. Clara gazed at the evening sky and smiled. She understood now the truth could be buried, but it never truly dies. Anyone, even a forgotten widow, could become the torch that lights the darkness. Application to life today. The story of Clara Jennings is more than a frontier legend. It is a reminder for us all. The truth may be hidden, but it can never be erased. Even ordinary people, those without wealth, power, or influence, can rise up against injustice when they hold on to truth and courage. In our modern world, we still face our own Blackwoods. Corruption, deceit, systems that seem too big to fight. But if a widow with nothing left could stand tall, then surely together we can too. The lesson is simple but profound. Justice isn't only in laws or courts. It lives in the hearts of those brave enough to defend what's right. Clara Jennings turned her loss into fire, transforming grief into the will to fight. And that is something each of us can do, no matter the time or place.